It is jarring. I think of it as a repetition compulsion disorder of the warfare state. It's built into the political economy, what drives the mass media, the military-industrial media complex that has so much of a grip and hold over people on Capitol Hill.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup.
This is Ashley with Status Coup.
On the ground.
In Philadelphia.
Flint, Michigan. East Palestine, Ohio. Please support the leading independent news outlet on the ground.
Covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be joined by two titans of the fight for justice against corruption and who have been in the progressive movement probably longer than I've been alive. Joining me now, Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohn. Norman Solomon is the founder of the Institute for Public Accuracy, also co-founder, national director for the major online activist group rootsaction.org, and also author of a book I actually just ordered, a free plug for you, War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of its Military Machine. And Jeff Cohen, who I have spoken with several times over the years, a longtime media critic, used to work in a dark age for Fox News. So did I, so not shaming you. Also founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, founded the media watchdog group FAIR, which is great, and also with Norman co-founded rootsaction.org. So I wanted to speak with you guys, particularly about the Democratic Party, but we have to start with the latest illegal war that America has launched. President Trump over the weekend launched what he called complete obliteration of Iran's three sites that they claim that are housing potential nuclear bombs. There's been conflicting reports. The New York Times, among others, have said that there was severe damage after our strikes, but it's way too early to say anything has been completely obliterated. We know the backdrop that both Benjamin Netanyahu and other war hawks have been screaming for the last 30 years that Iran is 5 minutes away from a nuclear bomb. So the evidence for this illegal act, because again, Congress is supposed to authorize any war actions, which did not happen. The evidence seems to me as flimsy as the evidence for the Iraq war. But let's start with you, Norman. You've been a long-time anti-war activist. President Trump seems, I think, naively to think this will be a one and done and there will be, few consequences. What do you think?
As you said, this is the latest illegal war. And according to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 gives that power to declare war to the Congress. That's been a dead letter, really, for the last many, many decades. And so in terms of what's coming up, of course, it's hard to tell, but the arrogance of the U.S. government and basically the gist or the maximal aspect, dominant mass media is, hey, the United States can do whatever it does and has a right to do it and will ultimately prevail, even though from Vietnam to Afghanistan to Iraq, that's not the case. I think we should note that air power is a particular infatuation of the mass media and people on Capitol Hill. And one of the real differences from the Iraq war to this one is that the national security state is much more sober and the political elites are not so happy about the idea of sending a lot of U.S. troops. So we're above it all because we have this technology that is above everybody else. We can do 30,000-pound bombs. Even the huge and powerful Israeli Air Force can't do it. So it's very much do as we say, not as we do, lecturing Russia about its terrible invasion of Ukraine, but our own terrible invasions, Afghanistan, Iraq, the war on Libya, all the rest of it, that's just, oh, well, meant well, didn't go so well. So this is really what J. William Fulbright, senator during the Vietnam War, called the arrogance of power. We don't get to run the world. The USA, Uncle Sam, is not capable of doing that, but keeps trying.
And Jeff, I mean, you founded FAIR, which I think has done some of the best media criticism, analysis, exposing of the gross conflicts of interest that our corporate media is intertwined in. But I did the painful act of watching some of CNN over the weekend, the Sunday morning shows. I mean, fortunately, they are diminishing in power as independent media podcasts rise. But, they still definitely dictate. I mean, reports are some of Trump's actual decisions on doing this was based on vibes he got from watching Fox News. I wish that was an Onion headline, but it's not. But let me ask you, because I'm watching it and the media is essentially, they have like former generals on as analysts describing, the awesomeness of this, secret mission that we were saying we're going to send aircrafts to Guam, but we actually did a bait and switch and sent them to Iran. I heard nothing about that this was illegal and didn't have constitutional authority. And I heard very little scrutiny on where is the evidence that Iran is close to, having a nuclear weapon. What has been your thoughts of the coverage thus far?
Well, it's a rerun. It's a horrible rerun of what we've seen in past wars. I'm hearing ABC, their lead report last night, ABC World News Tonight. The reporter called it an audacious attack. And then the anchor, David Muir, who actually went to Ithaca College, great sight to see these aircraft back at home safely. There's no pretense of being objective, independent journalists. They're cheerleaders for war. They've always been cheerleaders for war. I'm watching some of the same people come back who were taken in, were propagandists, cheerleaders for the horrendous war against Iraq. Norman had experience with Nick Robertson. He's now called the chief diplomatic correspondent of CNN. I think he should be called the chief war correspondent because it's always war. The last thing this guy seems interested in is diplomacy that might prevent wars. And on MSNBC, they bring out their military analyst who was wrong month after month in the lead up to the Iraq invasion, a guy named Jack Jacobs, retired colonel. Back then, in 2003, he was asked by Lester Holt, what does the Pentagon think? What's the buzz at the Pentagon about Hans Blix, who was the head of the United Nations inspectors, weapons inspectors inside Iraq? And he says, well, he's seen as like Inspector Clouseau, the utterly incompetent detective in the Pink Panther movies. He listens to the last person he's talked to. He's very malleable. It turned out Hans Blix, everything he said was accurate, 100% accurate. They had no weapons, had no nuclear weapons program. He said it over and over and over. And the people that went on TV and got it wrong, like Colonel Jacobs, they've just seen their career rise. As we used to say at FAIR, the more off they are factually, the more on they are on the air.
Right.
And it's always been the case that these pundits get it wrong over and over and over. I remember the old Spy magazine, which was not a left-wing magazine in the US. They used to just every issue, they'd have a rundown of all the things that the pundits had gotten wrong. And it doesn't matter if you're completely wrong in your analysis, whether it's domestic or foreign, over and over and over, you just get airtime and no one ever has to apologize. The news media did not apologize for getting the run up to the invasion of Iraq wrong. And it's some of the same people doing the same cheerleading today for war on Iran. And no, there's no evidence, there's no debate, no serious debate anywhere except in the US about whether Iran has a nuclear weapons program. They don't. Tulsi Gabbard said so in March, the head of intelligence for the United States. They don't.
She actually said that they haven't seriously had a program dating back to 2003.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
And then
it was the same thing in Iraq. The mainstream media was entertaining this idea they may have nuclear weapons. People were going on Oprah's show in 2003. They might be able to strike us with weapons of mass destruction in our own homeland. And of course, it was all nonsense. And what we're getting from the mainstream media, as usual, whenever the U.S. is involved in war, is more nonsense. I mean, Norman's previous book, War Made Easy, shows that every single war the U.S. has done since the 1960s, invading the Dominican Republic and Vietnam, it's been always been preceded by a series of lies that about the war that the U.S. media has promoted.
Right. And Norman, that was actually my next question. I wasn't alive during Vietnam, but I'm watching a documentary now on the Vietnam War, and it really struck me, not to be a downer to activists, but it struck me how little has changed. How it's kind of like, if I didn't know I'm watching Vietnam, I would think I'm watching modern day. I mean, back then they created a boogeyman, which was, the Red Scare, the commies. If we don't stop them in Vietnam, they're going to move towards us, and everything will be commie. Then you had police, dating back to 1968, the DNC, cracking down on peaceful protesters. We see what police are doing out there. I mean, from the Gaza protesters to protesters in LA. I mean, it's kind of just jarring that over 50 years later, some of the same themes, propaganda are playing out from Vietnam all the way to now.
It is jarring. I think of it as a repetition compulsion disorder of the warfare state. It's built into the political economy, what drives the mass media, the military-industrial media complex that has so much of a grip and hold over people on Capitol Hill. And when we're looking at today, there is the echo in this century of, for instance, the applause line from President George W. Bush in the lead up to the illegal, immoral invasion of Iraq in 2003. We can't wait for a smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. Condoleezza Rice's aide loved to use that kind of line. And we're hearing that now. So there's one layer of, well, do they really have weapons of mass destruction? Turns out Iraq doesn't. I think it is turning out through real intelligence, not just the other meaning of intelligence, but just common sense. There is not a nuclear weapons program in Iran to speak of. And then at another level, hey, there is a power with a record of invading other countries, of slaughtering civilians in the Middle East with nuclear weapons. The name of that country is Israel. And when you think of all the coverage that we've had in the last weeks and months about conflicts in the region, and now with Iran overtly, how often do the news accounts or commentaries get into or even mention that Israel has nuclear weapons? And the dangers are huge there, of course. But, we may remember that the Oppenheimer film was a huge box office success, a lot of media, and it was supposed to raise our awareness of the real dangers of nuclear war. And yet that has sort of subsided, set aside. Okay, a lot of tickets were sold. So I would say, Jordan, another layer is that we have a mass media and political power structure that asserts the right, the prerogative of the United States to do whatever the hell it wants. And so here you have one power in the Middle East with reportedly 100 to 200 nuclear weapons. And we have an assumption that they have a right to nuclear weapons. The United States, its ally, has a right to support and not even mention their nuclear weapons. But woe be it on to any other country in the world, or certainly in the region, to have nuclear weapons if the U.S. people in power don't want them to. Well, again, that's back to the arrogance of power. And people would say, oh, well, we can trust Israel with nuclear weapons. We can trust the United States with them. Well, there's one country that's used nuclear weapons on human beings, and that's the United States. So the track record is not great.
Right. And what's interesting, Jeff, if Iran was going to try and get a nuclear weapon, it seems like what we have done, and now Israel, as we speak, is continuing these attacks, would actually expedite their attempts to try and get a nuclear weapon, because Trump is kind of openly giving away the game that we want to do regime change. This is not particularly about nuclear weapons. We want to install a puppet there. It seems that as a deterrent, this would give Iran more motivation to try and obtain a nuclear weapon just for deterrence sake.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that these wars and invasions and attacks and bombings have consequences. And they're often consequences we are not expecting or don't want to happen. I could see people in Iran and the leadership drawing the conclusion that you're suggesting they may draw. The reality is that we had, through diplomacy, one of the few things from Obama era that I supported 100% from the Obama administration. They negotiated a diplomatic solution, which had complete inspections. They could only enrich uranium to a certain percentage, the kind that could be used in nuclear energy plants, and no more than that, completely inspected. And Trump pulled them out of that agreement. So, I mean, the US public is tired of these wars. And there's even Republicans, the polls are not good about starting another war. Most of the public is with us, who've been historically in the anti-war movement. I think a big issue that, is the problem of the Democratic Party leadership. They are in the bag of AIPAC. Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House, and Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, are AIPAC allies, and it's but whatever AIPAC wants. So Jeffries can't even bring himself today, to at least as of yesterday, to say this is unconstitutional for the president to start a war, to start bombing a country with all these stealth jets and these dozens and dozens of bombs. He won't even say it's illegal under the Constitution. There are some Democrats in the House that are saying that. And then there's others that are going much further, like Bernie Sanders. And Bernie's saying this is a war based on lies, just like all the other wars beginning in Vietnam. And, when Bernie was giving a talk in Tulsa in his Fight Oligarchy tour, and at the time that the bombs went off and the U.S. acknowledged them, that they had bombed Iran, and he read the social media post from Trump to the crowd, and it started chanting spontaneously, "No more war, no more war." And while that might be a self-selected group of the U.S. public, those attending a Fight Oligarchy rally headed by Bernie Sanders, it really is the majority of the U.S. public. And the Democratic Party leadership does not represent that majority. It doesn't represent that majority on war. It doesn't represent that majority on cutting the military budget and taking those resources, all those billions of dollars, and spending it on housing, health care, child care, environment. That's what the public wants. But the Democratic Party leadership is out of touch, not only with the base of the Democratic Party, but with the broad public. And it's the case on war. It's the case on the genocide in Gaza. It's the case, healthcare reform. They're always out of step. Why? Because the Democratic Party leadership is controlled by the donors. And we're always, and I read the New York Times the other day about the Cuomo versus Mamdani race in New York City, where a Democratic socialist is neck and neck with this disgraced former governor, Andrew Cuomo, for mayor of New York City. And the New York Times is still covering money as if it's a good thing,
right?
Not just neutral. The candidate that raises all of this money or has PACs raising and spending. Well, that's the strong candidate. Now, I look at television, and when I see one candidate's got all this money for commercials, I'm looking around for who's opposing that candidate, because that's who I'm going to support. I don't want a Democrat who's controlled by these corporate interests. But in the US news media, how much money you raise without looking at where the money's coming from is typical. It's par for the course for
Right.
US media coverage. So the problem is that we've proven, and I know, Jordan, I know your work going back decades, we've proven Bernie Sanders, AOC, you don't need corporate donors to raise millions of dollars, because there's all sorts of working people and middle-class people that will give you small donations. Jeffries can't do that because he doesn't stand for anything. Schumer can't do that because he doesn't stand for anything. But if Democrats stand for something, all these little people come together and give them the millions and millions of dollars they need to compete, even in our screwed up political system, where all the money goes to the mass media, which is why the mass media, the corporate media, are not for campaign finance reform.
Right. Norman, I'd like to ask you broader about the Democratic Party. As Jeff said, I mean, essentially, the majority response so far to this Iran attack is simply, hey, we're supposed to be the ones that approve starting World War III. It's not, for the most part, opposition to it, aside from Bernie and a few others. So that's number one. But number two, you wrote recently about that the DNC itself, which recently most of the headlines have been about internal squabbling, in response to Trump's, I would say, capital F fascism at this point. They just met, like, the executive committee for the first time in several months in Arkansas. It was kind of under cloak of darkness. There wasn't much publicity about it. It seems that meeting was mostly kind of to pump themselves up on how great they're fighting Trump. There's been other reports that the DNC is spiraling in terms of money because their big dollar donors have kind of slowed down a bit. But I'm looking at this. You know, Bernie infamously, I'm paraphrasing, said the Democratic Party would rather go down on a Titanic as long as they remain in first class. I mean, it seems kind of obvious in an off election year, you got an 83-year-old bringing out 40,000 people in LA, bringing out 20,000 in Idaho, and not just lefties. I mean, there's independents in those crowds. There's Republicans. It seems pretty obvious if you're interested in winning. This is not a messaging issue. This is a policy issue. This is a corruption issue, as Jeff was just talking about. Can you kind of elaborate on why was the DNC just meeting for the first time in several months? And what is there any coherent strategy among the Democratic Party other than, Trump's a fascist, put us back in?
As you say, it's a policy issue. It's not about, tweaking the messaging. It's what's in the package, not the wrapper and the advertising. Bernie said right after the debacle of Trump's victory last November, it's not surprising that the working class has abandoned the Democratic Party after the Democratic Party abandoned the working class. And so, especially without a Democrat in the White House, the Democratic National Committee is crucial. It can steer the party in one direction or another. Well, usually at the steering wheel has been corporate power. And unfortunately, now we have sort of a lot of disarray, confusion. Who is or what is the leadership and vision of the DNC, Democratic National Committee? As you mentioned, I mean, this was the first time in 5 months that the powerful executive committee of the Democratic National Committee met. And this was just a few weeks ago. They hadn't met since December. And rather than have an in-depth discussion, various proposals and so forth, we were stunned at Roots Action. We sponsor Progressive Hub on the online, progressivehub.net. And we were the only media outfit outside of Arkansas to cover that event. We had a live stream, and it was just astonishing to us that here we have this powerful committee basically running the only opposition party to the fascistic Republican Party. And as you say, under the radar, it's like they're going back under a rock because they had nothing to offer. They scheduled 90 minutes, or they actually had a 90-minute discussion We heard it was going to be 3 hours. I thought that was preposterous. Well, they didn't meet for 3 hours. They met for an hour and a half, and they had nothing to say, nothing to debate. It was, you can't say dog and pony show. Okay, it was a dog and donkey show. But this is the idea that it's just a PR problem. It's not. And the base of the Democratic Party wants to fight the Trumpists, wants to fight these fascistic GOP MAGA forces that are running roughshod, destroying so much in this society. War on poor people, war on the environment, war on gay people, just the horrific fascistic politics going down right now. And instead, what we're getting is a Democratic Party that we need. I mean, for those who are saying, oh, well, let's have a third party. Well, that's been talked about certainly for my entire lifetime. There's a reason why in 40 plus years, the Green Party has never come close to electing one member of Congress. So here we are with a fascist party in power, running the White House, running the entire executive branch, running the legislative branch, and a lot of the judicial branch as well. And so this is a paradox, I think, that we're facing. It's a contradiction, and it's very real. On the one hand, as we've been discussing, the Democratic Party is in so many ways a corporate entity that is not working for working people, wannabe working people, retired people. That's a reality. The other is in electoral terms, such as coming up next year in the midterms and the 2028 presidential election, the Democratic Party electorally for federal elections is the only instrument we have to stop the fascists.
And, Jeff, it's interesting. I've been kind of reporting across America on the ground about a decade now. And for the most part, you go to MAGA rallies, you hear kind of people foaming, Sean Hannity talking points, Steve Bannon, from the corporate Republican Party to the MAGA Republican Party. But most of what comes out of people's mouth is talking points they get from partisan media. On the other side, I remember at Hillary rallies I covered, Biden rallies, same thing, other side. I mean, for better or worse, most people, not as much prevalent among the younger crowd, but definitely, older people, the dominant audience for cable news, broadcast news. I would say the New York Times reader is older. But I was pleasantly surprised, I was covering the protests outside Tesla during those protests for against Elon Musk. We've covered a lot of the anti-Trump rallies. You got a hell of a lot of what I would say normie Dems out there, people that voted for Hillary. I didn't, check their voting cards, but just the vibes we got. People that traditionally vote for establishment corporate Democrats, they're more comfortable with that. And they were ranting against the Democratic Party for exactly the reasons Norman said. They don't want fundraising emails right now. They want to fight, and they're not getting one. A lot of them were complimentary, actually, to Bernie because he's going around the country. Do you think that's actually sustainable? Because it's hard to kind of, for lack of a better phrase, no offense to the older crowd, it's hard to kind of rewire an ideological dinosaur in this country who has been fed that steady diet of propaganda from corporate media. But I have seen, at least under Trump 2.0, a lot of normie Dems seem to be moving left.
Oh, I agree with you. I think at the base, independent voters and, formerly centrist Democratic voters are utterly incensed, not only by what Trump's doing, but by the inaction, the failure to lead the leadership of the Democratic Party. There's no doubt that's happening. If we could go back to media criticism, the New York Times wrote an in-depth article on the infighting within the Democratic National Committee. And one of the points made is that big donors are abandoning the DNC. And if we had a different DNC, and by the way, there is a new head, Ken Martin, who's not as bad as the previous 2 or 3 DNC chairs. But if we had a DNC that threw in with all this energy and said, Ken Martin approaching Bernie and saying, I want to join you at the next Fight Oligarchy rally and point out that the Democratic National Committee is shifting and we're going to be focused on small donors and fighting and activism and a progressive agenda. And we're no longer going to cater to the big donors. Well, all of a sudden, and I know so many people, activists, who would never give a dime to the DNC. But if the DNC turned a page and saying we're in league with AOC, we're working with Bernie, we're supporting Medicare for all, a peace agenda, cut the military budget. We're not going to accept dark money. We're going to make sure that Republicans no longer intervene in Democratic primaries to knock out progressives like Jamal Bowman in New York and Cori Bush in Missouri. It's a new party. If they did that, and I'm not holding my breath, but if they did that, all of a sudden, there wouldn't be this huge distance between the DNC and the progressive activist base. But right now, among the progressive activist base, people look at the DNC, and I know, Jordan, you covered it in 2015, 2016. They remember what was done to Bernie. And, it's just hard to get activists enthused about the DNC. But if the and Ken Martin, the new chair, and, Norman's had some correspondence with him, he came into politics with Wellstone, the senator from Minnesota, the progressive ally of Bernie Sanders. So that's how he started. So if the DNC somehow turned the page, I'm not holding my breath, activists all of a sudden, oh, okay, they're starting to speak the language of AOC, Bernie, and the millions that are in the base of the party. And, the activists, the ones who know how to get out the vote, the ones who know how to call rallies and mobilize, that's the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which just has no faith in the DNC. And
I want to also point out, and Norman, maybe you have thoughts on this. You mentioned Ken Martin. He's the head of the DNC. He was recently interviewed covering the event for you, Progressive Hub. And he was asked about cutting off this big AIPAC, dark money spending in Democratic primaries. He said, yes, in fact, I'll be bringing forward a resolution on that, and I'll be pushing hard for our party to come up with solutions on this so that we actually have our candidates and campaigns realize that we have to live our values. We can't just say we want dark money out of politics and then have candidates and their campaigns accepting all types of support from these shadow groups. We actually need to reverse course. Hey, if he's going to follow through, amen. But I would say, I don't think people realize, I've covered primaries. Nina Turner's primary comes to mind. She ran in twice, but the first time was in a special election in the dead of summer in August for that congressional seat in Cleveland. I mean, she was up about 25, 30 points, according to the polls, before AIPAC got in. And I was there that week before the election. I mean, most people are not political diehards like us three people watching now. They don't even know there's a primary. And for those that do, they're just tuning in maybe that week. And you're just flooded with campaign TV ads painting Nina Turner, and you could replace her with Jessica Cisneros, the progressive in Texas, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush. We could go down the list. You're just nonstop. All you're seeing is this person is anti-Semitic. This person is anti-democracy. This person, they had billboards around Cleveland, with Nina Turner's infamous quote saying voting for Biden's like voting for a bowl of shit. And I don't think people realize that much money is swinging these elections. She lost, I think, by 3,000 votes. So if the Democratic Party cared about, democracy, which they're ranting about it when it comes to Trump, but in their own campaigns, that it's a much different tune. Norman, do you think we could actually see, at least on the DNC level, them, trying to eschew this dark money? Because I think, listen, I don't think the answer is going to be in any one politician or even a squad, but it would certainly be better, in my opinion, if we had the Nina Turners of the world, the Cori Bushes, Jamal Bowmans, and they are very clearly losing because they're being flooded, overwhelmed by this dark money from AIPAC, Democratic Majority for Israel, and other groups.
What Ken Martin, as head now of the DNC, said in the interview with Progressive Hub a few weeks ago was encouraging, and it was notable to me that we still are not hearing any wisp of this through the mass media. The DNC, despite the efforts from Roots Action and Progressive Democrats of America organization to have them call a special emergency meeting, given the fascistic moves of the Trump administration, we only still have 2 meetings a year of the full DNC, and the next one is coming up in late August. So pardon the cliche, but the devil will be in the details in terms of how Ken Martin presents a program to get dark money out of these primaries. Jordan, what you're saying is absolutely correct. We really have this terrible influx of millions and millions of dollars taking out Cori Bush, taking out Jamal Bowman, keeping Nina Turner out of Congress. This is not the voice of the people. This is the voice of mega bucks when you have 10, 12, $15 million being thrown into primaries, not even about the issues, because the motivation from AIPAC, from so-called Democratic Majority for Israel organization, is Israel right or wrong, no matter what Israel does, keep funding them with billions of dollars a year of military arms and bombs and the rest of it. But they say, oh, you don't do constituent services well enough or something. It's really off topic, because more and more, especially young voters and voters in general, we're turned off to, we're learning about, we're against what Israel's doing. So it's a bait and switch, diverted attack. So with all this money being thrown at progressive candidates, what we have now is a question of, can, again, pardon the cliche, can the power of the people prevail? And I think that's where the 2 models come into play, which Jeff just mentioned. AOC, Bernie Sanders can raise huge amounts of money in small amounts. And that's the future of a truly Democratic Party.
And Norman, I'll follow up with you, just pushback, because you mentioned third party, Green Party, which you're right about. I mean, obviously the Green Party is one on the local level, certainly not Congress, definitely not on the presidential level. But you obviously hear from people, including in my audience, the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over. The Democratic Party is what it is. It's not going to change. And you see polls, obviously, in recent years. I mean, close to 60% of Americans are open to a third party. You saw in Nebraska, the candidate who ran a super competitive. I have a newborn, so my brain is fried. I forget his name, but he ran a super competitive primary in Nebraska as an independent, kind of running Bernie-style populism. But what do you say to that? Because a lot of people would say now is the time. You got Republicans at these town halls screaming at Republicans, tax the rich, and screaming about these cuts. And like we said, you have these normie Dems out there, not necessarily saying burn down the Democratic Party, but they're not happy with the current Democratic Party. Do you think now might be a different time if there was a serious third-party effort?
Well, now has always seemed to be the time, but the structure of politics and elections in the United States is vastly different than in Germany or in France or in Great Britain. If AOC had run third party, and I have great respect for bartenders, she'd still be a bartender. If Rashida Tlaib had not run as a Democrat, she also would not be in Congress. That is the history and the reality of the structures in this country. There's a reason why these third-party efforts, going back to Barry Commoner in 1980, who I supported with the Citizens Party, have gotten nowhere. And my dear friend who we've lost, Daniel Ellsberg, used to say, he analyzed these structures, these realities of past and current history. He said, I'm all for third parties on the right. The more that we can splinter the right electorally, the better. But in terms of fighting the right and advancing a progressive agenda, the fact is that this is where we are. And the Chinese strategist, who I think has been so profound, and I wish I could remember the name, but I do remember the adage, which is, when you're in a struggle with an adversary, don't do what you most want to do. Do what your adversary least wants you to do. And so at an emotional level, of course, we want to say, screw the Democrats, have our own party, just as people in the last 50 years have done time and again without electoral success in terms of Congress or the White House, rather than just doing what we emotionally want to do on impulses, let's actually do what our enemies don't want us to do. And that includes not only the right wingers of the Republican Party, it also includes the corporate Democrats, because they want us to exit. Because the consultant class, they win no matter what. They get their contracts and they get wealthier and wealthier no matter who wins. They don't lose elections. But in terms of actually winning elections against the right wing, and in terms of having victories for progressives to change policies, we shouldn't do Dem exit. We got to do Dem entrance and give these corporate Democrats a real fight for their money and gain power and run the party the way it needs to be run, which is to the left.
You know, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. In sports, I mean, if you continually lose, you tend not to get a big fat contract. You know, you get cut from your team. But in the Democratic Party, it's the ultimate fail upward. I mean, it's really unbelievable. Like you said, the contractors. Did you have something to add, Jeff?
Yeah. The other ones who fail upwards are those who are completely wrong in the U.S. mainstream media and their careers. Those who got the Iraq invasion wrong, they're more powerful today than they were 20 years ago. The thing I wanted to add is it's not just Rashida and AOC, who we would not know who they are if they decided not to run in the Democratic Party. They wouldn't be in Congress. We'd probably never heard of them. But I know, Jordan, I met you around Bernie's first campaign. And in my view, Bernie has accomplished something that no other individual has. And I'm the guy who used to talk to corporate mainstream media and try to get them to broaden who they included in panel discussions and debate shows. There's a big audience for progressives. Now let someone represent the progressive voice. I made that argument for decades. And Bernie proved I was right. That because Bernie ran as a Democrat, if he'd run third party, it would have been, are you a spoiler? Are you a spoiler? Is your 2% going to hand the race to the Republican? He ran as a Democrat, even though he'd been an independent and we supported him all that time as an independent. But when you run for president, he chose to run as a Democrat. And I believe he took progressivism out of the closet. He took the full agenda of Medicare for all, cut the military budget, Green New Deal out of the closet. He took the concept of democratic socialism out of the closet. That only happened because he entered the Democratic Party. And the same thing, if we're talking history, happened in the 30s. The great journalist Upton Sinclair, lifelong socialist from California, was living in California. He would get 2% of the vote, running as a socialist, 5%, 8%. And then he runs for governor. And he decides, we're going to take, the Democratic Party is a shell. It doesn't stand for anything. We're going to take our socialist principles into the Democratic Party. And he came this close to be the governor of California because he ran as a Democrat. And he was no longer in a tiny third party. He took these majoritarian, majority-loved issues and policies and brought them to the masses because he ran as a Democrat. And again, I detest the leaders of the Democratic Party. Norman and I have been protesting against these people since the Vietnam War in 1968, when we supported Gene McCarthy, the senator who was against the Vietnam War. So I've got no love for the current leadership of the Democratic Party. But when you look at electoral strategy, I think the history shows that there have been these major shifts in U.S. public opinion when leftists have taken their program into an electoral fight as Democrats.
Right.
And I mean, I believe the shift that Bernie has accomplished, and, you know, I was with progressive Democrats in 2014, begging Bernie to run. And we thought, gee, if he got 20, 30% of the vote, at least he'd bring all these issues. He nearly got the nomination. So no, I believe that recent history especially has shown that, especially national and statewide, you run in the Democratic Party. Dan Osborne is the guy you were thinking of in Nebraska. the labor leader. There's some places where an independent campaign makes a lot of sense. It doesn't usually for president, that's for sure.
I want to ask before we close, this for both of you. I think, and I could get you going for an hour on this, Jeff, but I think the media is a big part of this story when it comes to the Democratic Party and the overall situation we're in, because it's gotten to a point. I mean, if you look throughout history, one of the telltale signs of autocracy, fascism, is essentially shutting down and controlling information. And we have a media now. I mean, the world's richest man basically bought Twitter and made it into a right-wing cesspool, right? You got Jeff Bezos, bought the Washington Post for a couple of years, whatever, he was hands off. Now he's kind of making it into a libertarian utopia in the opinion page. I mean, we could go down the list. MSNBC, I call it MSDNC. It's a spokesperson for the DNC. It's not as horrendous as Fox News. Fox News is just right-wing propaganda, dangerous propaganda, in my opinion. CNN, I mean, essentially it's just status quo, and a lot of those defense contractors are advertising on CNN. You've got these corporate newsletters like Politico, et cetera, brought to you by Amazon, Lockheed Martin. And then on the other side, the mainstream media has kind of been purchased for a long time, but now it's getting worse. But then you kind of have, some of these kind of bro shows like Joe Rogan that, in my view, maybe it's entertaining, but they don't know anything and they just have right wingers on and don't challenge them for 3 hours. Or you have kind of the Theo Vons of the world, nice guy, big podcast, but I don't have anything against him, but he doesn't know anything. He can't challenge these people when JD Vance or Trump come on and just lie. So it's like, pick your poison. You either have completely, I think it's worse than just corporate media. It's now oligarch media, or some of these alternative shows that people are turning to because the corporate media is so bad. But these alternative shows, with few exceptions, are kind of just platforming propaganda too. So it's a dark, you have outlets like Status Coup. I mean, not trying to toot our own horn. It's very hard. The few independent outlets that are actually on the ground doing investigative on the ground journalism, nobody wants to fund that because it's against the corporate interests. So, Jeff, I'll go with you first. I mean, I think there's good things happening in independent media, but there's also there's a ton of noise, and a lot of it, I think, is just elevating propaganda.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis of the media system and its various parts 100%. I am a little more optimistic because I've been in the independent media for decades before you were around, that independent media has never been stronger. Independent, serious, journalistic media like Status Coup, doing investigations. We know what you did in Flint and elsewhere. We add in Democracy Now!, Pacifica Radio, and all the community stations. Add in the progressive podcasters. Add in even the Young Turks where you used to work. Add in all the websites, Truth Out, Common Dreams, The Intercept. For the first time in U.S. history, millions of people, not only every day, but every hour, can get not only non-corporate news, journalistically serious non-corporate news, they can get, in many cases, anti-corporate news. So when Norman and I have been talking about how a Democratic Party that responded to the moment would eschew corporate donations and say, we're just taking donations from the masses, that's how independent media have grown. And whenever I talk about the media, I talk about the importance of people giving the $20 a year, the $50 a year to the independent news outlets that they rely on, and become the advertising department for Status Coup. Yeah. You know what Jordan's doing day after day after day. It's your job to use email, social media, word of mouth to get more people to be watching Status Coup. So, as you know, I've been a big believer at FAIR since 1986 when I founded it, in media activism. And today, media activism means heavily you promote independent media, you donate to independent media, you become the advertising arm of independent media, because corporate donors are never going to sponsor serious journalism. That's a contradiction, because serious journalism investigates corporate power and unjust power, period. I mean, that's what I'm a believer in, building independent media and being a media. If you're a progressive activist, you have to be a media activist.
Right. And Norman, what are your thoughts? Because with Roots Action and Progressive Hub, you guys, like you said, you were one of the only ones there covering that DNC meeting in Arkansas and Little Rock. What are your thoughts on kind of the opportunity, as Jeff was pointing out, in independent media?
Well, what both of you have been saying, I think, are simultaneous truths. There are these different aspects. I think you used the term, Jordan, oligarch media, and I think that is what's dominant right now. And a lot of times it's disguised. It's more, well, suck up to oligarchs media. I mean, when Zuckerberg of the Meta empire, within minutes of the victory of Trump last November, sends this kiss his feet, suck up tweet out, we want to work with you. When Jeff Bezos, I mean, fill in the blank, what does he own? Amazon, Whole Foods, Washington Post. He's supposedly not a right winger. He immediately does a tweet sucking up to the new president-elect Trump, coming around worse this time, second time to the White House. So it is a obsequious kiss the feet sort of approach to oligarchs that sweeps so many people in, including many, many career journalists. And then there is also this problem of confusing people between entertainment and real political understanding. And I really agree that that is a huge problem, where entertaining people and being flip and so forth, it's sort of an imitation of cable news, has now been taking over a lot of what passes for political coverage in the YouTube world. And very fortunately, we have exceptions like this program, like others, who are fighting against the tide. And in the long run, fighting against the tide that's a corporate tide is really essential. That's how we have change. If we simply go along with the major drift and flow and avalanche of what's coming from mass media, we'll go where they're taking us, which is more immiseration, more poverty, more environmental degradation, more extreme climate change, and war. So this is an essential fight. The fight over media is the fight for democracy.
And my last question, both of you, you both have been fighting, like you said, dating back to Vietnam. It seems to me quite a few of the things Trump is doing, I don't want to minimize Nixon, but kind of make Nixon look like child's play. I mean, some of the things Trump is doing, I mean, I think Doge was completely illegal, and it's still an open question if Elon Musk and his people stole data and information from the federal government to then weaponize it. The cuts to NIH and healthcare, RFK and his people doing horrific things to health, which is a life or death matter. This big, beautiful bill cutting Medicaid by nearly $1 trillion. Then you have the Pentagon budget, now nearly $1 trillion. We could go down the list. And I think, a lot of people kind of, even some lefties said, yeah, Trump will leave. He'll leave. And then January 6th happened. I think a lot of people are not taking seriously his jokes on running for a third term and not wanting to leave power. Thinking back to all your activism dating back to Vietnam, what's at stake now? Because it seems like we have clearly a megalomaniac and wannabe authoritarian in power, and just a circle of sycophants around him.
It's much more dangerous than Nixon, as you said. Norman and I went through the Nixon era as young activists. Nixon was a little crazy, as Seymour Hersh and Dan Ellsberg talked about. He had this crazy man strategy where he wanted the Vietnamese to feel he might drop a nuclear bomb if they didn't do what he wanted. So he was crazy. He was dangerous. We've never seen anything close to what Trump's doing. We've never seen a guy who openly boasts about being a dictator, about his desires to be a dictator. It's dangerous as hell. It's why in 2024, we were telling people, if you live in swing states, even though Kamala Harris has not even changed 1 inch away from Biden on the genocide in Gaza, you got to keep Trump out. And you guys have the power in Michigan and these other states. I hate Kamala Harris and what she stood for in Gaza, but you can't vote third party. You can't stay home. You've got to vote to defeat Trump. It was because we see Trump as a unique danger to democracy and our right to organize for progress that we were taking that position, but only in swing states.
Yeah, I would add that there are idiots like James Carville who are now saying, hey, just don't fight and Trump will self-destruct. Well, we've been hearing that nonsense for 10 years, and it's just wishful thinking. When you've got a fascistic force that is so powerful and in control of the federal government, you fight back. You don't wait for it to destroy itself, because if you do that, it will destroy you. The fact is, I think we're in a situation now where the circumstances are so grave. We hear that, oh, this is surreal. Well, a better word for it is real. This is what is happening, a fascistic takeover of the federal government. And progressives, whatever we call ourselves, liberals, independent, whatever, we have 2 overarching tasks. One is to fight the racists, the xenophobes, the misogynists, the anti-immigrant crazies that are historically present in this country and now have so much power. Fight them every which nonviolent way you can. And the other is to fight for a genuine progressive agenda that really puts people's well-being first. And the messaging, the propaganda from the corporate media is, oh, you can't do both. It's one or the other. No, you cannot fight right-wing, false, faux populism, phony so-called populism with corporate obedience. You can only fight right-wing, phony populism with genuine progressive populism. That's what Bernie Sanders is saying. That's what AOC is saying. That's what we need to fight for.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your time. Please tell people, both of you, where they could find your work, your organizations, so they know.
Well, I'd say rootsaction.org, where Jeff and I work. We have information through progressivehub.net and at the rootsaction.org website. And we're about learning and educating and agitating and organizing for change.
And also, I will say, this is a free plug because you didn't ask me to, but I did order your book because I'm interested in your perspective and reporting, and War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. I think it's pretty poetic right now because there's going to be a major toll. Iran is not going to just take this and not respond. And not to mention the economic toll, because it's always kind of what's left of the middle class and working class that have to kind of deal with the remnants of war. If we have a military buildup, God forbid, again, troops on the ground in the Middle East. So thank you both for your long time work, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan.